to have with us today um, Eric Holder, the Attorney General during the Obama administration and the first African American to hold that position. He is also chairman of the National Democratic Redistricting Committee. And we're talking to AG Holder during our Black Men Excel conference. And he's going to share with us his views on election 2020. So thank you for being here. And I hope all's going well with you.
All right. Well, thanks for having me, Derek. It's good to see you.
Yeah. This is great. We have a lot to get through, and I'm going to jump right in. Right now, we see so far there's an estimated 40 million people have voted, and that's 30% of the total voters during the 2016 presidential election. Share with me your view of where we are in the election cycle in terms of voting, and what's at stake for African Americans and others in this election.
Well, I think that, just generally, I think our democracy is on the ballot. We have a real question about whether or not the way in which this country has conducted itself at its best can be something that will endure. For African Americans, I think, the primary concern has got to be how is the next president going to handle the COVID crisis, because that has a whole bunch of, collateral impacts. The Black community has been disproportionately affected physically by the virus. The economic dislocation that the virus has caused has been disproportionately felt by African Americans. And so I think that is a primary concern. I think we also have to focus on what the next president is going to do when it comes to dealing with issues of systemic racism, criminal justice reform. So there's a whole range of things that I think we need to focus on, and that I think is at stake in this election. And this is why I think voter participation by African Americans, by people of color, is so critical in with regard to this election.
Well, you raise a great point about voter participation. I talked to some young voters, and they were saying in reaction to the George Floyd tragic death, the civil unrest, they said marching is more effective than voting. And some others feel disenchanted by, the candidates and the political process. What do you tell to those young voters, those young progressives, to get them from sitting out on an election to really fully engaging in the election as we look at the next few days of, before voting stops?
You see, I don't think it's one or the other, but I think we have to understand that that marching is critical. It's important. It helped raise the consciousness of the nation, but marching is a tactic in the same way that John Lewis and Dr. King marched. But the question then becomes, what do you do with the energy that marching actually generates? And I would think that you want to take that action, that activity, and then channel it into political action that will result, as it did during the Civil Rights Movement, into the Voting Rights Act of 1965, the Civil Rights Act, things that are lasting. And so I think, yeah, it's very important to march, but it's also very important to vote. A lot of those marches that happened in the 60s were designed to give people like me the ability to vote and participate in the political system. And so to those younger folks, I'd say, all right, march, yes. And I totally support you on that. Vote, yes. I think that is critical, because the reality is their futures are on the ballot, in addition to the democracy that I think is on the ballot. What kind of nation are we going to have? Are we going to deal with systemic racism? That's on the ballot. Are we going to have a climate that they're going to be able to live in? That's on the ballot. Reproductive rights, that's on the ballot. All of these things that are, I think, should be of concern to young people, that's all on the ballot. And the way in which you control that, influence that, is by voting.
Well, a real concern that you've raised is one of voter suppression tactics. Share with us how we can avoid those tactics, or how we can address those tactics. You also said that not be passive voters as we look at this process. And how can people navigate through the potential barriers to voting?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a real concern. It's unfair. It shouldn't be this way. Everybody ought to have access to the polls and not have all these impediments put in front of them. But that is the reality that we have to confront, and that's why you should have a plan to decide how you're going to vote. I don't want people to wake up on the morning of November the 3rd and say, "Oh, I think I'm going to go down to the polls and vote." No, if you've got the ability to cast an in-person ballot early, do so. If you have the ability and you want to send a vote by mail and you can do it early, do so. Have a plan. The reality is there are a lot of people who are going to have a hard time getting the opportunity to vote. All the studies show that if you're a person of color, you're going to have to wait in lines longer than your white counterparts. And for those who say, that voting is not important, that it doesn't matter, well, just think about all the effort that other people are going to, that one party is going to try to make it difficult for you to vote, to make it impossible for you to vote. They understand how important your vote is. But I think the thing for everybody to do is to have a plan. What is your plan to make sure that you're going to get your vote there as quickly as you can, and then make sure that it's counted? If we do that, if we actually have plans, and if we vote in great numbers, we can overcome the barriers that have been put in front of us.
Well, we're about to wrap. Just real quickly, one last question. Um, this obviously the focus is on the presidential election, but share with us the importance of the Senate and congressional races, as well as the down ballot contest.
Boy, Derek, that is a great question, and it is something that people don't focus on enough. I mean, I get that the presidential election is important. Joe Biden, I think, has got to be the next president of the United States. It's an existential presidential election. But when you look at these so-called down ballot races, your life is probably impacted more on a day-to-day basis by who serves in your state legislature in terms of, the things that matter to us: criminal justice reform, healthcare expansion, sane gun laws, voter protection. All that is decided in state legislatures. And so I would urge everybody to get to the polls, but make sure that you vote all the way down ballot and make sure that you make wise selections with regard to who will serve in your state legislatures, who's going to serve on your city councils, who are going to be your Supreme Court justices. These are people, again, on a day-to-day basis, probably have a greater impact on your life than the president does. So vote for Joe Biden, but also make sure that you're making wise choices for people who are serving in those state and local institutions.
Any last statements to share with our attendees at Black Men Excel?
I mean, I just think that, we have a historic opportunity. I think we have a historic responsibility. People fought and died, sacrificed so that we would have the ability to cast a ballot. And I think we dishonor that legacy. We dishonor their work. We dishonor their sacrifices if we don't participate in the political process by doing the thing that is most basic for any American citizen, and that is to cast a ballot. And for young people who are disillusioned or who don't trust the system, I think, take it from one who's a little older and has experienced a lot. Your future is on the ballot, and the world that you want to live in is on the ballot. And if you want to shape that world, you have to participate in the process by voting on November the 3rd. But then you have to continue to be involved in a civic way, and do the things that people before you have done. Fight for not only your generation, but generations that will come after you. We have the ability to shape the system, but we have to participate. We have to be committed to it.
Well, A.G. Holder, thank you for joining us. Like to have talk to you after the election and get your views as we continue to push forward.
All right.
Thank you so much, and we'll see you on the campaign trail.
All right, I'll see you on the campaign trail, and I look forward to talking to you after the election.
Okay, take care.
All right, take care.
Once again, thanks, Attorney General Holder. Now, for more on this topic, let's turn to our panel, Black Men Matter, What's at Stake in the Presidential Election?
Well, hello, everyone, and welcome to this powerful session here at the Black Enterprise, Black Men Excel Conference, Black Men Matter. What's at stake in this presidential election? And we have with us as guests and conversation partners, Brother David Clooney and Brother Bakari Sellers. And welcome, gentlemen, as we discuss today what is truly at stake in this presidential election. We all have heard the pundits and the reports and the polls, and we all understand, yeah, including people.
Was that an attack? I felt seen and attacked at the same time.
We've heard all the rumors and all the talk, but could you frame for us what you view to really be at stake in this presidential election here in 2020?
After you, Brother Bakari.
Well, thank you so much. David doesn't let me go first often, so I'll take this as joy. For me, there was a recent CDC report that just came out that showed that the overwhelming majority, 75 to 80% of the young people who have died due to COVID under the age of 21 have been Black and brown. I think that I tell people, vote like your lives depend on it, because it truly does. And this is a moment in which I haven't seen in my generation. I wasn't around for the election of 1968 and 1970. But for my generation, this has been the most active participatory that I've seen individuals. We're going to shatter a record. They anticipate having 150 to 160 million people turn out in this race, overcoming suppression, overcoming oppression, overcoming a pandemic. And so this is, we say this too often, but this is the most important election of our lifetime. It will help shape and mold the future of our democracy.
So I couldn't agree more. This is absolutely the most important election of our lifetimes. Our physical, mental, and financial well-being are at stake. I think I've been encouraged by the level of civic engagement we've seen in the streets with people marching, but I've been concerned about hearing younger voters in particular talk about my vote doesn't matter. Why do I have to get engaged? And I think about just the power of the Black vote. First of all, if it wasn't valuable, people wouldn't be trying to take it away from us. But also just what we represent. Black voters represent 12 to 13% of the electorate, and the margins by which the 2016 election was decided were very small. And you think about a state like Michigan, where there were over 400,000 eligible Black voters who did not vote in that election, and that state was decided by 10,000 votes and change. So we have the opportunity to make a real impact. And as we've spent the majority of 2020 talking about race and racial equity in a completely new way, I think we have a real opportunity to galvanize this moment and hopefully make more progress in the next 2, 3, 5 years than we have in the last 20, perhaps last 40. So there's so much at stake in this election.
Sure. Let's deal with the big elephant in the room, and that is that of all the demographics that Black men support for Donald Trump has grown over the last 4 years, from 9% to now 18%. What do you attribute that to? And then what are some ways that Black men can be targeted to and specifically have their needs addressed by a system that seemingly has, that they believe has failed them? And what are some ways that we can address and talk to our brothers? Because we know that a lot of this will come down to the decisions of Black men.
Yeah, so like I'm now you caught me in transit. I'm in a Hampton Inn lobby as we speak today, because I am leaving a barbershop in Monroe, North Carolina. I'm doing a chop it up with nothing but Black men, and headed to Greensboro, North Carolina to speak to more Black men. And then tomorrow I'll be in Durham speaking to more Black men. I think Black men are the swing voters of this election. For far too long, though, we haven't paid attention to Black men. For far too long, we haven't listened to them and messaged to them. And so when that happens, you have individuals who have filled that void with misinformation, disinformation. As Democrats, as Republicans, as whomever, many people have taken Black male voters for granted for too long. And I think that we've reached a point, somewhat of a tipping point. And so I spent a lot of time listening to my brothers, me and David, I think this is one of the reasons we see eye to eye so well, is because we're tired of the conversation of policy with Black men centering around criminal justice reform. We want to talk about access to capital. We want to talk about education. We want to talk about healthcare. We want to make sure that we're talking about our small businesses and strengthening them and thereof. We want to talk about why our wives are dying at 3 to 4 times the rate during childbirth of white women. And so these are the issues that we have to begin to address. And I'm doing my damnedest to go on the road, socially distance, and attempt to get that message out to my brothers.
Bakari is absolutely right. For too long, Black men, Black folks have been taken for granted. And I think if either party or either candidate is not speaking directly to Black folks, well, if anybody's not speaking directly to Black folks, people will fill that void. And I think we've seen some interesting public discussions recently, just this week, and I saw Bakari weighed in on this. Ice Cube, the rapper, made some statements about, well, neither party has looked out for the interest of Black folks and Black men. So I reached out to both parties. One got back to me, so I'm working with them. And I think we have to be smarter than to take the bait. To basically, we have to know who has been on our side and who hasn't. I will say full stop. Both parties and every candidate needs to do more for Black men. I think there's a legitimate concern about our ability to participate and impact yet another American institution that has taken Black folks for granted. We think about the financial system, the education system, the healthcare system, workforce, otherwise. And of course, there's a legitimate concern about we haven't had access to or been taken seriously in any of these other institutions. Why would voting be any different? But some of the numbers we talked about earlier about what can happen when we come together and vote in numbers and make our voices heard. And Bakari has been an elected official. He knows that the people who get the attention of the elected officials are the people who are politically powerful and show their power at the ballot box. So that's what we absolutely have to do to change the outcomes we've been getting. The outcomes we've been getting are not nearly good enough to date, and we want more than the status quo, but we have to be smart about what we're being told and be bold in our asks. And that's something that I think I really look forward to going forward from 2020. We're having a completely different conversation about our asks and what we want. And I think we absolutely should be bold in making our voices heard at the ballot box so we can actually see those things through to fruition.
Let's talk about
I just want to make sure that, one of the things that we don't want to do is push Cube out of the conversation.
Exactly. I agree with that. Because there are a lot of people who think like he does, who say, yeah, neither party has been looking out for me, so I'm going to go with whoever's engaging with me.
But it's a testament to how bad we are at politics too, and how much we have to learn about the process. And I would equate it to this. I mean, Joe Biden put together a Black equity plan, a Black equity agenda. He put together a Black agenda. You have a Black VP who will be spearheading the public health aspect of COVID relief and the economic aspect of COVID relief. You'll have a Black Supreme Court justice. These things are facts. And, it took meeting with people on the ground, the BEAs of the world, the Alicia Garzas of the world, the NAACPs of the world. And I equate Cube as coming in, calling LeBron James the night before the NBA finals, talking about, let me give you advice on the pick and roll. Like LeBron would hang up on him, and rightfully so. There have been people who have been in this field who have been doing the work for a long period of time. I appreciate the fact that we are asking for an agenda, because we should. Evangelicals do it. Gun owners do it. Pro-lifers do it. Everybody does it except Black folk, right? And so I appreciate us asking for that agenda, but I just think the politics of it make it extremely dangerous, because people are voting, and the last thing we want to do is be suppressive. And the last thing we want to do is give people a reason not to choose Donald Trump or Joe Biden, but choose the couch.
Which is what happened in 2016, and we saw the outcome.
Yeah, it brings me to this moment around what happens on November the 4th, right? When we talk about what's at stake in this election, we know it's not just about folks turning out early and going to the polls on November the 3rd, but reality is that we have a president who has not admitted to or consented to a peaceful transfer of power or to protecting the results. So what is our call to action for Black men on November the 4th, and the work that must be done to ensure that this agenda that we intend to have for Black America is implemented, but also that our results and the election is protected?
So, and I think you're speaking of November 4th intentionally as the day after Election Day,
Sure.
Talking about how do we keep engagement, past the election. And I think that's been that's been a failing on both sides, both from politicians and from us as a constituency group, that we think it's all about the election, and then we are, why are we not showing up in offices and writing letters and making campaigns to make our elected officials listen to us at every level of government throughout their time in office and let them know exactly what we want. And that's the process that I think does need to start on November 4th and continue. And again, I think that's a place there's just a ton of room for opportunity for Black folks to have a louder and more impactful voice than we had before. So we should be thinking right now about all the things we're marching in the street about, and we're asking for how we are going to ask these new and re-elected folks we put back in office on November 4th through the end of the year into the new Congress and beyond, exactly what we want, and be helpful to them. That's part of what BEA does. We provide them with data and information and resources to folks and communities that we know they're not connected to. Help them help us, essentially.
Yeah, I mean, I look at this totally different than both of y'all, and I just have to admit it. And it's partly because I was an elected official and I know what these final moments are, and ran for office. And part of it's because I have PTSD from 2016. But like, I can't get to November 4th without November 3rd. And like, my ministry right now, Reverend Green, is getting people to the polls, like whatever it takes. Like, we out here loading up buses, getting church vans greased up. I mean, we're out here making sure people have a plan to vote, that people, what I mean? People didn't even know, they don't know nothing about curbside voting. They're like, my mama can't wait in line that long. I'm like, I know your mama can't. That's why we're going to pull up on the curbside, honk the horn. They'll come out, stick the ballot box in her car. And so I'm so concerned. My fear is people not showing up. And I tell people all the time, look, you may not care for either one at the top of the ticket. That's your prerogative. But do you know that justice is on the ballot in the sheriff's office? And you want to ban no-knock warrants? That's your mayor's office. The prosecutors are on the ballot. Judges in certain states are on the ballot. And so my goal right now, before people talk about a peaceful transfer of power, we got to make sure there is power to transfer. And we have to win an election. So that's my focus. My focus is on November 3rd. And then I firmly believe that at 12 o'clock on January 20th, Secret Service is escorting him out to go somewhere, wherever he want to go in the world. And maybe that's naivete, but I just believe that to be true.
Sure. And you mentioned about the importance of down ballot races, right? Like, we know that no-knock warrants and some of these challenges that we have seen around this racial uprising that is taking place across the summer really boils down to what happens in local municipalities and county jurisdictions and state governments. And so can you speak to the imperativeness of not just down ballot races, but also as we look towards like what's beyond this election around the redistricting that will happen as a result of this census that was just cut in the middle of the month, right, on a 24 hours notice, and all of that plays into how we will distribute our resources, how our resources will be redistributed, how congressional districts will be apportioned, and things of that sort, that people can recognize what's truly at stake and what's on the ballot in this election.
So I'll start to address that. And I come from the Black Economic Alliance. We look at things in terms of business, and you think about return on investment. State and local elections are the best place to get a return on investment for a much smaller investment of time, money, and you have often much more access to the people who are your state representatives, senators, city council members, and otherwise. And a few examples are, you think about a place like St. Louis, Missouri, St. Louis County, who after the killing of Mike Brown in 2014, really took a look at how that city was being run, how the rules came about, who was in charge, and started to vote people out and vote new people in, like their first Black district attorney in St. Louis County. And it's not all about being Black, but it's about having authentic representation who understands what the problems are and how they need to engage with the community in a different way. And I think you've seen a sea change in how law enforcement and is done in St. Louis, and really just city administration, instead of pulling Black folks over and at hundreds of times the rate of white folks and essentially lining the pockets of the city coffers. You have a real appreciation for how you are supposed to treat people, and you can think of examples like that. Redistricting is another example. That is such an important function of our state elected officials and the governors in different states. And that is a reason that the Republican Party has been as successful as they have, gaining ground since 2010 and really even more than that. And again, it's not about Democrats and Republicans. It's about knowing what the people you put in office are there to do and what their intentions are in doing it. And we have a lot of work to undo with redistricting. And Bakari can probably speak to this in more detail. But as I think about return on investment, when you're investing in as a voter and as a contributor and just as a concerned citizen who's giving input to your elected officials about what you want, you have so much more of an opportunity to impact the outcome of decisions that your elected leaders make at the state and local level. And often those things have much more of an impact on your daily life. So you absolutely should be engaged in that process.
Yeah, David covered that well and with great depth because those things matter. The census, redistricting, all of those things matter. I'm going to talk about one other thing that's important. It's not necessary. It's down ballot a little bit, not like all the way down, but it's like right there. Because for everything that you want a Kamala Harris and a Joe Biden to do, it will be all for naught if Mitch McConnell is still the president of the Senate. And so right now you factor in, and I'm just going to be real with y'all because I think that's why y'all got me here. You factor in the fact that Doug Jones probably will not be victorious in Alabama. And so you got to win. You got to win 4 seats. It's a, kind of 2 right now. You got to win 4 seats. You factor in Doug, so that puts us in, Colorado, Arizona. That puts you in Maine and North Carolina, which is why we're here. Iowa would be a gravy. Alaska would be gravy. Montana would be gravy. These other states, Georgia, South Carolina would be. If we win Georgia and South Carolina, we cooking with grease, baby. And, Kansas, those type states. But those 4 states actually get you where you need to be. So I don't think that, in fact, I know Jamie would be mad at me for saying this. I know Jamie don't need no more money. This man could not spend $57 million in South Carolina unless he bought all the TV stations. Like he literally would have to buy the stations to spend all that money. But there are some individuals down ballot in Kansas and Iowa. Although we're dominating in the fundraising, who could make phone calls. Even if you can't give any money, make phone calls, call your relatives, making sure that they're showing up to vote. That Senate really, really matters because if Mitch McConnell's president, Mitch McConnell blocked 118 judges for Barack Obama. One of those judges was the individual who's supposed to be in Amy Coney Barrett's seat today as she walks to the Supreme Court. He has appointed 180 judges at last check. It might be ticked up a little bit more. None are African-American. None, not nail one. These are the type of changes that we have to make. This is why the things that you were talking about, Reverend Green, and David are talking about are so important.
Yeah, I think that's important because I think that a part of our strategy must be to just pivot to the Senate, right? We should just, I think that we've done, of course, we need to ensure that we do handle the top of the ticket, but like the investment for the party and at the top of trying to ensure that we have a U.S. Senate that would ensure the effectiveness of passing all the bills that I guess are in Mitch's graveyard, if you will, H.R. 4, which is for the people, and the Justice and Policing Act, all these bills that passed the House that had no momentum in the Senate. It's imperative that we look at that. And also SB in Mississippi and our brother.
I forgot about, Mike SB in Mississippi. We got 5 black folk, if I'm not mistaken. We got Ralph Warnock. Yeah, Raphael Warnock, he hates when I call it. Raphael Warnock. We got Jamie Harrison. We got Mike Espy. We have Tennessee. We have Tennessee, and I'm my brain.
There are some black Republicans running as well, so we should count all the black folks running generally. But yes.
We have black Republicans running for the Senate, David.
John James and
John James in Michigan. Yeah. That's a close race.
It is.
I'm gonna let David count him.
Look, there have been 10 black people in the United States Senate since Reconstruction, so we need to be counting everybody.
Trust me, one represents me. I do understand that.
Exactly right.
In the first 100 days of an administration, we know are some of the most critical days. What is it that black men and black people should be requesting from in a new administration in the first 100 days?
Oh, there's so much stuff that's broken. I almost curse right there because it's a lot. And I can't do that with you, Reverend Green, on the phone call. I do it in front of David, but I would not dare curse in front of you, Reverend Green. There's so much stuff to do because there's so much stuff broken. But I think the first thing you have to do is implement a strong serious public health response to COVID. We're still in the midst of COVID. You'll still be in the middle of the flu in January. And so that public health and economic response, which David can probably speak to, are very important. That's first. The second thing, and this is really, really important to me, is that we have to strengthen the Voting Rights Act, because then you have power. You have to strengthen the Voting Rights Act. You have to pass the John Lewis piece of legislation. You have to pass HR 1. All of these things, they do things like make voting an election day. Election day a holiday. They do things like same day voter registration. So you can actually go down on election day and register to vote and your vote be counted. They streamline the process. You couple that with Kamala Harris's bill, which she infuses $10 billion into ramping up and modernizing our election data systems and processes to have safe and secure elections. I just think that's one of the first things you have to do is protect, preserve, and enhance the tools we have that allow our democracy to flourish. Because there's no reason John to Austin is in Atlanta waiting 11 hours to vote. There's no reason that's the case. And we have to make sure we prevent that.
Well, there is a reason, and it's called voter suppression, and I'll get to that in a second. But Bakar's absolutely right. The first thing we have to do is get this pandemic under control. It has literally stopped our way of life in its tracks. But I think, obviously, I'm biased because we focus on economics. But thinking about what the opportunity we have with the focus that there's been on racial equity in the past year to do something like a Civil Rights Act of 2021, and how focused that would be on racial equity with an economic lens, and undoing the work of the past of Black folks being kept out of economic opportunity on things like home ownership, access to capital, creating pathways for us to get into the workforce of the future and the future of work. There are a number of things that government has the power to do, particularly partnering together with the private sector that has been more active in the last 6 months than I've ever seen in talking about and taking action on racial equity. That economic justice and closing the wealth gap is something that is going to be a necessary component of any economic recovery package and plan. And I think about a report that McKinsey put out last year in 2019 that showed if you were to close the Black-white wealth gap, you could add between 4 and 6% growth to U.S. real GDP by 2028. Citi also put out a report saying the U.S. economy has lost $16 trillion.
But David, you just said that like it's easy. Closing that wealth gap, you're talking about 228 years of separation. So, I mean, you're talking about a direct infusion of capital that is substantive.
And you're absolutely right. And I don't expect this to happen overnight, but I'm trying to draw out that the scale of the problem is huge. So we need to think big and stop, scratching at the surface like we've been doing with a lot of policy. So there's a lot to do, but on voter suppression too, we talk a lot about voter suppression as this thing of the past, and you think about literacy tests and poll taxes and Black folks being turned away. But right now, Black folks are 7 times more likely to wait over an hour to vote than white folks are. I heard a candidate in Georgia recently say that Jim Crow in Georgia, because of the tactics that are being used there, is being called James Crow Esquire because they're so sophisticated and so nuanced. But we have to be on the lookout when you see something, say something. If there are obstacles, things that are getting in your way with voting, it is not always a coincidence or a product of high voter turnout, which is great that we have such high voter turnout in early voting this year. But we need to go in armed with the facts and absolutely refuse to leave a polling place without casting a ballot. Sometimes it'll be a provisional ballot, but don't take no for an answer, essentially, and be very clear that there are powers at play, foreign and domestic, that are targeting the Black community in particular with the intention of, and they have effectively diluted and suppressed the Black vote. So we have to go in prepared to overcome all those obstacles and make sure we cast our vote when we attempt to.
Sure thing. And also, I believe that this is the first time, perhaps, that the Democratic Party or a major party platform has included a commission for the study of reparations as part of their party platform plan. And so we hope that that will also be part of the first 100 days to begin to find ways to close that racial wealth and health gap in this country. So we've got just a few minutes left. What is your final charge to brothers across the country who are watching and tuning into this session with just a few days left before we go to the ballot box on November 3rd? What is your message to the brothers who are listening?
My message is take advantage of this opportunity we have. You know, Bakari touched on this. We have, we're making history in that one, we're showing out numbers we never had before so far. We have to keep the momentum up. But two, we have a Black woman who is an AKA from Howard University and HBCU who's about to be in the White House as the vice president, speaking on our behalf. And we have a presidential nominee in Joe Biden that I think understands better than than any nominee from outside our community that I've ever seen about the need for racial equity to be at the top of his agenda and not a talking point. But we have to show up. If Black folks don't show up, particularly Black men, but in general, we won't be heard. And so in order for us to have leverage after folks get into office, not just the president and the vice president, we have to show our power as a voting bloc. And my hope is that we have historic voter turnout this year and overcome the odds of the pandemic, of all the voter suppression efforts, and show, dispel the myth that Black people don't vote. And there's only one way we can do that is by showing up in huge numbers.
Yeah, mine is very simple. I mean, I think that it's ensure that we carry the torch of the Marion Barrys, the Julian Bonds, the John Lewises. We lost John Lewis and C.T. Vivian, and we lost them in a matter of days. Elijah Cummings, Kobe Bryant. We have to carry a torch, right, of people who mean so much, and we need to reclaim our rightful position within our own community. And what that means is we have to stand up and we have to carry the burden and shoulder the burden of being the people who are pushing for the change. And the way we do that is at the ballot box. And the way we do that is by organizing. And the way we do that is to get our fellow brother who may be wayward, who may think voting for Trump is cool, to understand that this is worth more than that. And we have to have some sanctity in the box. And we're going to work as hard as we possibly can to change the world around us.
Thank you both for this robust conversation. We're grateful that voting is a tool in our arsenal as we resist and as we continue to begin to imagine the new world order, our beloved community, as Martin King talked about. We want to thank Black Enterprise and BMXCEL for convening this conversation today. Thank you again, Brother David and Brother Bakari. And we look forward to seeing us press our way to November the 3rd, and hopefully we can celebrate on November the 4th or begin the work so we get to January 20th.
Well, that does it for us at our 4th annual and first virtual Black Men Excel Summit. We hope you got what you came for and much, much more. All of the conference content will be accessible on the Black Enterprise website at blackenterprise.com. Now, you got a lot of work in over the last 2 days. It's time to play. Join us in the networking lounge, where we're going to let the workday vibe go and show how we get down with the one and only DJ Nasty to rock the house. Thanks for being here, and thanks again to all of our speakers, coaches, and sponsors, especially title sponsor FedEx. Stay safe and stay well. DJ Nasty, let's go.